Hello, 10th graders. Today we are going to be talking about ancient Rome, and we're going to try a new thing here. I'm going to see if I can't put this into Edpuzzle and set it up so that you know what sort of questions to expect on the quiz, and you'll have a better notion of how to study for it. So, today we're going to start with sort of an open-ended question. Is it better to be popular or to be powerful? And I want you to think about this for a minute before we get started. And you're going to get an opportunity here to put in your own answer to this question too. But think about that. Is it better to have, say, a huge army that'll do what you tell it to and have everyone hate you, or is it better to have everyone love you? And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the course of today. So yeah, let's get started. Of course, like most things that we do here, I always like to start every new area that we're looking at with geography. And so here we have in front of us a map of uh, Italy. And you can see that this map is showing you basically altitude, but you can also see a series of rivers running through Italy. You can tell there's a lot of water here, not just in the Mediterranean Sea, but also on land. So they're able to grow a lot of crops, a lot of wheat. So that means you're going to have a lot of people. But also, you can see that it is absolutely surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea, and of course, the ocean is really good for trade, but also good for moving, armies around and that sort of thing. So Italy is, in this case, very well situated to set itself up to be a really big player in the entire Mediterranean Sea. Right? You can see there's Italy; it's the boot right there in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and Rome, of course, is right. Is right there on the Italian boot, right on the front shin. Uh, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. All right. Uh, Now, the Roman Republic, Rome does not start out as a republic. Initially, it's a kingdom, but eventually it sets itself up as a republic, and that's where we're going to start with them. Uh, the Romans are made up of two groups. There's the patricians, and you can see up here on the left, the light blue, the patricians, and then in purple, the plebeians. And you will notice that there are a lot more plebeians than there are patricians. Patricians are essentially nobles. The plebeians are everybody else. So there are two elected consuls who rule Rome, right, and the army. The consuls are in charge of Rome. They're also in charge of the army, and you can see that they're sort of at the top. They sort of fill this role almost similar to that of president. They run the army, and they're ruling over Rome. Now, the senators, there are 300 of them. They are chosen by the consuls. They control the money, administration, and foreign policy. So they are not elected by the people. They are instead elected by the consuls. Then you have the tribunes, and the tribunes are a number. There's a smaller number of them, and the tribunes can veto and protect the plebeians' rights. So you'll notice the tribunes are all plebeians. Not a one of them is a patrician, so they are all nobles, right? The tribunes are noble, or the tribunes are not nobles. They're all peasants, and wearing the purple, right? And so the tribune's job is to protect the peasants, right? And then last, we have the assemblies, and that's this big group down here. These are made up of adult male citizens, and they're the ones who enact laws. They appoint magistrates. So you can see the Roman Republic, there's a lot of power in the consuls because they get to pick the Senate. Um, but at the same time, there's a lot of power spread out elsewhere. The tribunes are checking everyone else's power because they can veto anything that anyone else does. So the tribunes can shut things down if they don't like it. And then you have this sort of division of power, right? This balance of power. And that's very similar, I think, to something that you see in the American system, right? Where you have these checks and balances, right? So the tribunes can check the senators, just like just like the Supreme Court can check the Senate and the House, and the Senate and the House can check the executive branch and the executive, right? So there's these checks and balances. They're all interwoven with each other, and that's something important to keep in mind here because it sets a base, right, for what the United States bases its system off of. But it's going to be impossible for us to talk about Rome without at least mentioning Carthage. And if you take a look down here, you can see Carthage is this city here. Now, by the third century, right? So about 300 years before the year zero, before before Christ, um, before Common Era. The Romans have conquered the Italian peninsula and they've begun to exert power in the Mediterranean world, right? So they've taken over the boot and they're looking outwards. They're thinking, we've got the boot, we can go elsewhere. Um, the problem is that elsewhere is controlled by this powerful city called Carthage. So Rome is now in charge, and now is now looking to fight with Carthage. And Carthage controls the Mediterranean Sea. They are the bosses of the Mediterranean, and Rome wants to challenge that. So, in a series of battles that become known as the Punic Wars, and you can see them all set up right here, Rome defeats Carthage and becomes the dominant power in the Mediterranean. They take over and they become the real power of the Mediterranean. And when the Romans take over Carthage, they burn it to the ground. They leave no two stones on top of each other. Excuse me. And then they salt the earth. And when you pour salt on the ground, plants can't grow there. So they don't just destroy the city of Carthage. They erase it they erase it. They get rid of it forever. Punic Wars, of course, meaning punishment, and that is where that comes from. So now, Rome has conquered all these new territories, and they've gained all this new wealth because of the Punic Wars. They've taken out the biggest power in the Mediterranean, the Carthaginians. Carthage is gone. Rome is now unopposed. They can do what they want, right? And so one of these great generals who's going to lead Rome's expansion is this politician named Julius Caesar, and he's going to come back. He's going to be a big deal. We're going to talk about him. Right. But there's problems. Rome's expansion is bringing in money, huge amounts of money, massive amounts of wealth, and slaves. But this is creating problems. So these new lands, these new sources of slave labor, and all this stuff is coming into Rome. Who's getting to take advantage of it? Is it the rich or the poor? Well, the rich are taking advantage of it. The poor are not. And so it's creating this bigger gap between the rich and the poor. The rich are getting richer. The poor are not so much. So these generals then who control these armies are becoming more powerful than politicians in the Senate. Because if the people of Rome want to get rich, how do they do it? They join the army, they go conquer territory, and then they're given some of it, right? So these generals who are bringing in all this wealth, they're bringing in all this power, are now becoming more and more powerful than politicians in the Senate themselves. And so then we have these struggles for power, and it leads to a series of civil wars in Rome. Julius Caesar ends up winning/losing, depending on how you talk about it, how you look at it. So Julius Caesar takes advantage of the chaos in Rome. He's named dictator in 46 BC, right? Now, he initiates a number of reforms that offer Roman citizenship to conquered people and create new jobs. But remember, this guy is a general, so he has a massive army, so he already has a significant amount of power. But by initiating these reforms, right, that offer Roman citizenship to conquered people, by creating new jobs, he has now made himself really, really popular. So he's not just powerful, he's also popular. And many senators are fearing Caesar's popularity and his power. Since he is a dictator of Rome. Now, a Roman dictator doesn't mean that he's in charge for life. Dictators in Rome are put in power in times of crisis so that they can fix it, and then they're supposed to step down. But the Senate is afraid that he's not going to. Not only that, but he's very, very popular and very, very powerful. So he has a combination that's making him very, very threatening. And so in 44 BC, senators, a bunch of them, attack Julius Caesar and assassinate him. Here you can see a picture of sort of an artist's rendition. Supposedly his best friend was in there too, depending on who you talk to. Caesar's last words were supposedly "Et tu, Brute," which is Latin for "You too, Brutus," which was his best friend. He was stabbed 26 times in the Forum on March 15th. And so he was popular and he was powerful, and a bunch of senators stabbed him to death. Now, this assassination then leads to another civil war led by Caesar's adopted nephew Octavian and also his best general Mark Antony. And when the chips have fallen, the Roman Republic is dead. And instead, his nephew takes over. Now, Caesar's death changes Rome. People are no longer trusting the Senate to rule Rome and the Roman Republic. Comes to an end, right? The empire begins, right? If Caesar's so popular, if everybody loves Caesar and the senators kill him, then what does that say for the empire? Or what does that say for Rome as a republic? And the people are done with the republic. And so Octavian, right? And you'll remember Octavian is Julius Caesar's nephew. He takes over and he becomes the unchallenged leader of Rome. He takes the title Augustus, becoming Augustus Caesar, the exalted one, and he becomes Rome's first emperor. And under Augustus, Rome is ruled as an empire. The Senate still meets, but the emperor has all the real power. And that's where we're going to stop. If I went too fast for you, you can always go back. I will share these slides in Google Classroom as well, and you're free to take a look at them there too if you like. You'll notice that they're a little bit longer than what I showed you. We're going to do this in small chunks. So, yeah.